So you've decided that today's the day you're going to sit down and learn Blender. You've seen those fancy Blender donuts floating around the internet and you think, maybe I should start here. Only to see that the entire lesson is 14 videos long. And at 15 to 25 minutes apiece, that's quite an investment for a program you're not completely in love with. But if you give me 45 minutes, I'll give you this. Now, just a little disclaimer, this tutorial is not a replacement for Blender Guru's famous donut series. Think of this as more like an appetizer of sorts. If I could show you how fun it is to use Blender, you'll be far more likely to jump into and appreciate massive tutorials such as his and many others. The only thing you need to know before you start this tutorial is how to navigate Blender with its simple and intuitive camera controls. I'll only be taking the time to explain very necessary functions to what we're trying to build here today. In addition to this, I provided textures and models for you to use in this tutorial, so don't forget to download those before you begin. So with that, let's begin. Okay, so we've just opened Blender, and it always opens to a default scene that contains a camera, a default cube, and a light source. What we're going to do is we're going to hit the A key and just hit the delete key and delete that. We're going to need a shape to be our donut. And we can add a shape one of two ways. We can either hit the add drop down at the top here, or we can hit Shift A and go to our mesh options over here. So we're going to grab the torus, and before we do anything with this torus, we want to actually edit the parameters of this torus so it ends up being more of what we want to work with. And by that I mean there's this little option down here, the lower left corner of the screen. You're going to click that arrow so that it drops down, and we want to add, or we want to change our major and minor segments, as well as the radius for the major and minor as well. So for the major segments, I found that 32 is pretty good, and 16 for the minor is good. And, you know, it doesn't have to be this exactly, but just when I made this before, that was easier to work with for me. So now that we have that set, we're going to set our major radius. According to Google, the average size of a donut is 3 inches, so we're going to put in 3 inches. Okay, and you'll notice that our donut is looking like a ball, and that's because we have to edit our minor radius because it's too big. I'm going to put half of the major radius, so we're going to put in 1.5 inches, and now our donut is looking correct. It's always a good habit to get into, actually working with real-world values in terms of scale. When we shade this donut, we're going to use what's called subsurface scattering, and the more accurate we are scale-wise, the more accurate it's going to look when we render it later. So something to keep in mind. But speaking of shading, you notice that this donut is looking pretty faceted. It's all these polygonal faces look a little strange. So let's smooth that out by actually changing the shading. And we're going to do that by right-clicking the donut and hitting Shade Smooth. Cool. That's looking pretty good. In addition to that, we also want to name this torus. Because right now it's just called torus, as you can see in our scene collection on the upper right hand corner here. So you can either double click the name here or hit the F2 key and name it from there. So we're just going to name it donut, and that is looking pretty good. Now there's one other thing we want to do before we start really diving deep into making this donut more donut-y, I guess. And that is we want to just break the shape up a little bit. It's a little too perfectly circular. Like, you know, I guess you could bake a donut this perfect, but let's just break it up a little bit so it's a little more realistic. We're going to jump into our modifiers tab here. And modifiers are basically this great non-destructive way to edit your object. And if you like what it does, you can, you know, bake it to the object. But it's just a great way to work without doing anything permanent. So we're going to add what's called the displace modifier. And if we click the add modifier button, we'll get this drop down. We're going to go to deform and hit displace. Now our donut just exploded, and that's because the strength of this is way too high. So we're going to click that and put in 0. And we're going to add a procedural image to this. All you really need to know is that it's going to procedurally generate an image that we're going to use to create the bumps in our donut. So we're going to click new here, and we're going to change your coordinates from local to UV. Don't worry about what that means just yet. It doesn't matter. And we're going to click this button here, the Show Texture in Textures tab button. And that is going to bring us to our Textures tab, which will allow us to add our cloud image. And we do that by clicking this drop down for type. And we're going to choose clouds. Now, nothing's happened yet, and that's because we have to go back to our modifier and adjust the strength of it. I'm going to use a strength of 0.015 because when I did this before, that seemed to give pretty convincing results. I don't know, that looks like a donut to me. So we're just going to live with that value. Now that we have that set, we're actually going to apply this. So this procedural change, we're just going to make it permanent by clicking this drop-down arrow and hitting apply. Cool. Now we've got our donut shape. Now let's start adding frosting to this donut. We're going to do that by actually using polygonal faces from this donut to make our frosting rather than creating a new object. And we're going to do that by editing our donut shape. So if we want to edit the donut shape, we have to go into edit mode. Currently we're in object mode, as you can see up here. And you can jump into edit mode by selecting your object and either choosing from the drop down here or hitting the tab key. I always hit the tab key. That's just a much easier way to do it. I'm sure most people who use Blender do it that way as well because it's just kind of like second nature at this point when you get used to all the hotkeys. Now we're in our edit mode and we have 3 components which we can edit in this donut shape. We have our vertices right here, which is just these nice little points. If I move it around, you can see that. We have our segments, which is the line between 2 points that we can edit. And then we have our faces, which is the polygon that is created from 3 or more segments, which looks like that. We're going to want to highlight all of the faces that we want to use for our frosting. And we're going to do that by holding the Alt key and clicking this segment in between 2 faces. And then that's going to actually highlight the ring of faces up here. And if we hold the Shift key, in addition to Edit key, we can highlight more rings of faces. So basically what we're going to want to do is we're just going to want to grab the entire top half of this donut to make our frosting with. And now that we have that selected, we're going to want to duplicate these faces and make them into their own mesh. So to do that, we're going to actually hold Shift and hit the D key. And if you move your mouse around, you'll notice that these faces are now moving with your mouse. We don't want to disturb the position of these faces. We want to leave them exactly intact. So we're just going to hit the right click on our mouse, and that will just duplicate in place. Now that we've duplicated these faces, we're going to want to separate these from the donut mesh, and we do that by hitting the P key and choosing selection from this drop-down menu. Cool. So if we hit Tab and go back to our object mode, you'll see that we have 2 outlines going on here. We have 2 orange outlines to show that now we have 2 objects in this scene. Also, if we look at the scene collection in the upper right-hand corner here, you see that in addition to having our donut mesh, we now have a donut.001 mesh. Let's just name this really quick to frosting. And in the interest of keeping this scene nice and tidy, let's grab both of our meshes here, and we're going to put them into their own collection. And we do that by hitting the M key and clicking New Collection, and we're just going to name this collection Donut. Awesome. So now we have our frosting and our donut. This frosting isn't really looking much like frosting yet. And let's start editing this so it looks like it is kind of leaking off the sides of this donut. So what we're going to do, we're going to put our scene into what's called wireframe mode. And you can do that by clicking this drop-down arrow for our overlays section here and clicking wireframe. Now, why are we doing this here? Well, I want to edit these vertices for the frosting, but I want to edit them in a way that they adhere to the shape of this donut mesh. We can do that by activating what's called snap, which, we click this button here and we could choose what we want to snap to. So we're going to be editing our vertices. We can choose edges to snap to, or rather segments that we're going to snap to. And let me show you what this looks like exactly. I'm going to turn this off. Whoops. I'm going to click our frosting mesh, hit tab to go into edit mode. I'm going to switch over to vertices. And if I just hit G with one of these vertices selected, it moves like pretty much everywhere. Like, you know, there isn't really any, it's just kind of moving like randomly in 3D space. So if I actually activate snapping, you'll see that now it stays locked to these segments here. And you can see that happening with that little orange highlight around the vertex C. Now, one thing I like to do, or rather I don't like to do, is I actually don't want to have this option always turned on. I tend to forget that it's on, and then when I'm working later on, I will accidentally snap certain objects to certain places that I don't want them to go. So rather than having this turn on, there is a nice handy little shortcut that will allow us to just activate this when we want to. And if we hit G and move this around, but hold the control key, now it's going to activate snapping for us. Pretty cool. So this part, we're just going to be grabbing these vertices and dragging them up and down while making sure that they adhere to the shape of the donut. I'm doing this at random, so don't worry if you know, yours doesn't exactly match up. It really doesn't have to. It's just, you know, so we can emulate the look of dripping frosting. So, you know, do what you think looks good. But this is just what I did last time, and it seemed to work pretty well. So I might just speed this part up. Okay, now we have that outside or outer radius done. Do not forget to do the inner radius. A little handy trick just to see where we want to edit the inner radius is we can just hold the Alt key and click on this segment. It'll make a ring around to the inside. And I'm just going to grab this and move it down. Okay, I think that's everything. It's a little hard to see what's going on here, so I'm going to tab back to our object mode here, and with our frosting mesh selected, I'm going to hit the / key, which is next to, you know, right shift. And we're going to just isolate the selection to see if I got all of those edges, and it looks like I did. So this is just a quick and easy way to check and make sure everything's looking pretty good. Okay, so we have a frosting, but it's not really looking like frosting. I don't know, this looks like a lettuce donut or something like that. So what we're going to do now is we are going to smooth this out some more. And we're going to do that by adding another modifier. Now this modifier is called subdivision surface. And basically what that means is it's going to subdivide the amount of polygons in this mesh so that it's much smoother and higher resolution. So to see that in action, I'm going to grab our donut mesh here, go over to our modifiers, add modifier, go to generate, and subdivision surface. And you'll see that it got smoother. I like to untick this optimal display button here because it kind of masks what we're doing. It just makes it simpler to view, which can be helpful, but since we actually are going to be applying these effects, or these modifiers rather, I want to see exactly how many faces that we're getting from this. So if we just like tick the real-time box here, we can see how much that smoothed that out. So it's looking pretty good. I'm actually going to select our frosting mesh, shift click our donut mesh, and we have this little drop down here, copy to selected. So now both the donut and the frosting have this subdivision modifier on it. And I'm pretty happy with that. It looks pretty good. Looks like we got enough to work with. Going to click this drop down, hit apply, and that was for the donut, and now I'm going to select the frosting and do the exact same. Okay, cool. So now this is not looking quite as jagged, although these edges are kind of flying off of the side of the donut, and I don't want that. So for the frosting, we're going to add another modifier, and we're going to go to deform, and we're going to add the shrink wrap modifier. And it does exactly what it sounds like it does. You basically just choose the target or the object that you want to shrink wrap this frosting to. And we're going to choose our donut. And now it is perfectly adhering to this, the donut mesh here. So now that we have that, we're going to apply. And now it's time for us to extrude the frosting mesh. So we're going to tab back into edit mode while having the frosting mesh selected. We're going to hit the A key so that we can grab all of our faces, or make sure we're actually in face select mode before we do that. And we're going to use an extrude. Now we have two ways that we can do this. You can either go to the face drop down here, or the more likely way is you can right click as well. There's also the E key to extrude, but it does an extrusion that I don't want to do, which is just going to extrude in one direction. And I want these faces to extrude in the direction that they're facing. So to do that, we're going to right click and we're going to hit extrude faces along normals. And we'll see that it puffs out in the correct direction. Now we're going to puff this out quite a bit. In our drop down in the bottom left corner here, I'm going to change this to 0.005. And that should give us what we need to work with this mesh here. Great. All right, cool. So that's looking pretty nice. Now I want to add these extra little like drips on the side. So I'm going to alt click here, and we're basically just going to grab them on the segments that we lifted and lowered before. And basically it's just like every other segment is what we're selecting here. So again, that is Alt, Shift, and clicking the middle segment here to get what we want. Now this one's a little weird. I think I'm just gonna grab it here. Don't worry if this is not exact, really doesn't matter. We're just kind of like randomly designating where our drips are going to be. And we're not even going to use all of these places or all of these segments here. So we have everything selected that we want to use here, and we're going to bevel these edges. In which beveling basically will just take say we just have this one segment or row of segments selected here, it's going to turn it from one line into two. So to do that, we're going to hit Control and B, and you'll see that it splits these segments into two. Now, keep in mind the inner radius of the donut. If we extrude it too far, then like these segments are going to crowd on each other, and it's going to cause a lot of mesh issues. So just eyeball how close you want to get on the inner radius rather than the outer. So that looks pretty good to me. And if you want to actually have an actual number, it looks like the width of this is 0.0023. That looks pretty good to me. Now we are going to extrude the drips of the frosting here. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch over to face select mode, grab the bottom of one of these beveled segments, and we're going to hit the E key to extrude. Now I want this extruded face to adhere to the shape of the donut. And if we hit the G key and try to do that with the Control key, it mostly does it, but it's doing it on the wrong part of this mesh. We need to change the pivot point of this. And we can do that pretty easily by going up to our pivot points here. And we're going to change it from median point to individual origins. And now if we try that again, it should do it correctly in the middle of this face here. So I'm just going to go ahead and like randomly extrude edges with E, hit the G button while holding Control to bring it down. Again, do what you think looks good. This is totally up to you. I'm doing this at random. I'm just kind of eyeballing it. Heck, if you wanted to, you can even grab one of these bigger faces and, try that. Could look okay. But I'm just going to keep it simple. If we break the mesh, we'll put it back together. That's usually the way you should try to learn these programs, is just get in there and just break it. and put it back together. Don't be afraid to do something that won't work or will create a mess, because you will learn so much more about these 3D programs that way. So if we look at that, looks pretty good for the outer radius. Let's do the inner radius now. I'm going to do that same trick of holding the Alt key and selecting this ring of faces by clicking the middle segment. And this is where I'm going to start extruding right here at the bottom of this. Okay, cool. Our donut now has these little drips. They don't look particularly great, but they will look pretty good once we smooth this mesh out even further and start adding our details. So now that we have that set up, we're going to add yet another subdivision modifier. So we select our modifiers here, go to Generate, Subdivision Surface. Look at that. That's looking pretty good. Let's add a few more levels here. And if I didn't explain it before, you have these 2 different levels here for your subdivision surface. Levels viewport just means that this is what we can see in our viewport, like the amount of smoothing that it's doing. And in render, when it actually renders an image later on, we can actually set this so that it's higher. And you would want to do that so that it's easier to work with, because if you like have a really high level of subdivision, it can actually slow down your viewport. But you know, when you're rendering, it mostly won't affect your renders. I mean, there is a possibility that you can have something that is just like way too high res, but you know, just something to keep in mind. Okay, cool. So now we have that. That's looking pretty good. I think I want to actually break up the shape of this frosting a little bit more. It's a little too perfect. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to untick these options here so we don't see our subdivision happening anymore. I'm going to have our frosting selected here and tab into edit mode. I'm going to go into vertices mode, and I'm going to grab all of our vertices. Actually, I don't want to grab all of our vertices. Let's just grab a certain amount. I want to actually keep these, like I don't want to touch these at all. So I'm just going to hold Alt and click the segment here in between these 2 verts. And we're going to grow the segment by holding Control and plus. And this will just kind of highlight all the verts that we want to affect here. So I'm just making sure that we're selecting everything down to right before the last, or I should say the last row of verts before we get to the edge of the frosting here. And now that we have all this selected, I'm going to right click and we're going to hit the randomize verts. So we're going to click that and our mesh has exploded. Don't worry, once again, the amount or the strength is way too high. So we're going to bring this down to 0.001, and it doesn't really look like it's doing much. Let's see what 0.0015 looks like. A little better. 0.002. Okay, that might be too much. Let's just keep it on the safe side. We'll add more shape to this later on with displacement. So I think we're just going to stick with 0.005 for our randomize. And if we look at that, let's turn off our wireframe mode here. We'll see that we're getting this interesting looking shape. It almost kind of looks like the frosting is you know, being affected by gravity and pulling down into the middle here. So that looks pretty cool to me. Now let's re-enable our subdivision modifier here just by ticking all of these. I mean, you can leave this one off. This just shows your subdivision happening in edit mode, and it's not particularly useful. There are use cases for it, but for our purposes here, let's just not do it. This looks a little weird. Let's see what's going on here. Oh, for some reason, this is just missing a face, I think. Or, oh, I forgot that I extruded this. And yeah, okay. So if you find yourself with this happening, you could just pull it out. It'll probably be fine. Let's see what that looks like. And you know what? That's kind of a happy accident. Let's stick with that. Looks pretty good. All right, cool. So we got that happening here. I just want to go to our overlays here and turn on statistics. I want to see what we got going on for the amount of polygons we're working with here. And it looks like we're at 212,000. This doesn't really matter to me as much because my computer is a little overkill for the work that I do here. But in case you have like a small laptop or something like that that doesn't have a lot to work with, I'm going to try to keep this from going too crazy and it being hard to, even work with or render. Now we want to add our sprinkles to this donut. And to do that, first we want to actually make a sprinkle object. We do that by hitting Shift A and choosing a UV sphere. Now I'm just going to set the segments. We're going to set the segments to half of this, so 16, and half of this, 8. And we're going to bring our radius down to 0.015. That's a little too big. We'll say 0.005. Okay, that looks good. So we have 0.005. I'm going to click on the sprinkle here. We're going to shade it smooth. And we're also going to name it sprinkle. In addition to that, we're going to give it its own collection by moving over here and hitting the M key. So we're going to do collection, calling it sprinkle. Great. Okay, let's see. So we're going to grab our frosting here. We're going to go down to our particle properties, and we're going to hit the plus button here and add a new particle system. Now it's just going to emit a random sphere from this. Obviously we don't want that, so we're going to switch it over to hair. And now we have hairy frosting, which we also don't want, which, I mean, that would be pretty gross. We're going to bring the number down to 200, and we're going to go to render here, and we're going to change render as from path to object, and then we're going to choose our sprinkle. So I'm just going to grab it from the collections here, and looks like it's scattered those sprinkles throughout. Looks pretty good. It's a little small, so let's bring the scale up. Let's see if we do 0.25. Okay, that's way too much. 0.15. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Let's offset the scale by adding some randomness. I'll put 0.25 for that. So it's not always like the perfectly exact same scale for each object. And now we have this issue happening here where our sprinkles are now being put on like the drips of this frosting, and I definitely don't want that. So what we're going to do here, because it just wouldn't adhere to this, it would probably fall off. So what I want to do is I want to actually designate an area that I want the sprinkles to populate. And we could do that pretty easily. We're going to use what's called vertex groups. We do that by clicking our frosting here, tabbing into edit mode. I'm going to switch to our vertices select. And we're going to do just like we did before. We're going to select the ring and grow our selection of where we want this to live here. Let's see. So if you actually hold Alt and Shift and you have something selected, if you want to deselect it, you can actually just click it again. We don't want to go too far with this. If we go too far down, we'll still have that same issue. So we're just going to grab the top half of this frosting, but stop, 2 faces short of the edge here, or rather 1 face short. I don't know how to, okay, whatever. You get what I'm saying. Anyways, we're going to grab this amount of verts. We're going to head over to our data properties, and we're going to start a new vertex group by hitting the plus button. I'm going to name this sprinkle area. And now that we have our new group, we're going to hit assign. And vertex group is just, it's a very handy way of keeping things organized for meshes. You'll find that a lot of parts of Blender work with vertex groups pretty nicely. So it's always a good idea to get in the habit of designating certain verts and faces and segments that you want to use later on. So let's go back to our particle properties, and we're going to go down to vertex groups and choose our sprinkle area for the density. And now it's looking pretty good. Doesn't go too far down. I just might adjust the randomness of where these are scattered. So we're gonna go to source here, Let me turn off random order. That looks better. Maybe even turn off even distribution. You know what? That looks pretty good. I'm just going to keep that like it is. I was just trying to avoid these sprinkles from doubling up on one another, and it's probably still happening, but to my eye, it doesn't really look like it's happening very much, so I'm happy with this. But, you know, if you want to play with this more, you can, you know, change the distribution from jitter to random. You can change the jittering amount. You can also play with the seed value, which will give you random positionings of each of these sprinkles, and so on and so forth. Happy with that. I think it's time we start moving into shading this donut, and we do that by adding materials. Now, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to set our render mode and introduce lighting to the scene so that we can see what the donut is looking like. And we do that by going up to our rendered view here. So we have like 4 different viewport shadings. We're just going to select this one, and you'll see nothing's really happening. It's just gray. We are actually using the Eevee render engine, so we're going to want to switch that to cycles. And we do that by going to our render properties, clicking the render engine dropdown, and choosing cycles. Okay, so not much has really changed. It's still gray. I also want to change this device to GPU, and I'm also going to tick this denoise box here so we can get a much smoother result quickly. So it's still gray. We need to add some lights. And a quick and easy way to add some very realistic lights is to add what's called an HDRI. And we can do that by going over to our world settings. And in the color here, we just hit this dot and add an environment texture. If we hit open, we can move over to where we stored our HDRIs and apply that. So for this one, I'm using an HDRI called Kiara Interior. I think this looks the best for what we're trying to do here today. I can't provide this because I don't own the rights to this HDRI, but I did provide the link as to where you can get this HDRI, and it's free. So all you have to do is head over to the HDRI Haven and, you know, give them a check out. They have a lot of really great stuff there for 3D artists, and a lot of it is free. It's kind of insane that this person has compiled all of this beautiful lighting imagery and, you know, assets for 3D artists, and most of it's free. If you can, support them, because they were really nice enough to give all of these artists like these tools that we use daily and not asking for anything in return. It's a lot of work to make this kind of lighting environment and to get it to look this good. Now that we have our lighting set, it's looking pretty good. This looks pretty interesting. Now we just got to actually add materials so that things are reacting realistically to the light, or rather these meshes are reacting realistically to the light. And we can do that by going over to our shading tab. So we're just going to click shading, and we're going to find our donut here. If you actually just click one of these meshes and hit the period key on your numpad, it'll zoom in on that. So just something to keep in mind. We're in what's called material preview. I want to see what we're doing in our renderer. So I'm going to switch to our rendered viewport, so it looks like what we were looking at in our layout mode here. So let's start with the frosting. What we want to do is we want to add a new material, and we do that by just clicking this new button, and it's going to give us a principled BSDF shader. There's really not much for you to know about this right now. It's like the default shader. This is what you'll be using 99% of the time for any objects that you want to shade in Blender. It does just about everything. So now that we have this set, we're going to change the name of our material to frosting, and we're going to pick a color. So try to do that hot pink, a little bit pastel. I think that's the word I'm looking for. And now that we have the color set, we want to change how it reflects light. And more importantly, we want to actually have it so that it kind of absorbs light a little bit. So first, let's just change the reflectivity of this. And we do that by altering the roughness. You see that we bring the roughness down. It gets less rough and a lot smoother and shinier of the surface. I don't want that. Well, I do want that, but I want to actually break this roughness up so it gives us more of a realistic result. And we can do that by leaving the roughness at 0.5, but adding a coat to it. So we go down to our coat settings here. And I'm going to put 0.5 for the weight. And I'm just going to rough this up a little bit more. So we'll say like 0.2. And that looks interesting to me. It kind of has this like fresh out of the oven look to it, but like, you know, not like completely melted frosting, if that makes sense. Okay, so the last thing we want to do here, now that we have the color and the reflectivity, we want to add what's called subsurface scattering. And to do that, we just click this little subsurface button here, and we have a bunch of different ways to adjust our subsurface scattering. Don't worry about any of this stuff. Basically, all we want to do is change this option from random walk to Christensen Burley. And basically all that means is just a method in which it will do the subsurface scattering. I find that this is great for objects that aren't skin. These two are great if you're trying to shade human skin, but this is great for, you know, what we're doing here with our frosting. So I'm going to put the weight to 0.5. And it's hard to see exactly what it did, but light is kind of penetrating this frosting now and scattering a bit, and you can see it in the shadows. So let me see if I can just get a good example. If we do 0 here, see how the shadows are really dark? But if we do 0.5, now they're a little bit, you know, rosier. They're kind of bouncing that light within, and that is definitely a much more realistic result for what we're trying to achieve here. So that looks good to me. I think we can call the frosting done. Now let's actually move over to the sprinkles here, because we're going to do something pretty unique for this. And we're just going to hit new, and we're going to name it sprinkle. And I'm going to do something similar to the frosting here. We're going to leave the roughness at 0.5, but we're going to add a coat to it. 0.5 weight and 0.15 for the roughness, make it a little shinier. But we want to actually change the color of the sprinkle so that it's multiple colors rather than just one. Because, I mean, you know, this just kind of, I guess it works. Like, there's probably donuts that have just like one flavor sprinkle, but let's do something a little more exciting looking. We're going to add 2 nodes here. We do that by hitting Shift A, and I'm going to click the search. We're going to add object info, and then we're going to add hue, saturation, and value. Now, we're not really going to get into exactly what all this stuff does. All you need to know is that we're going to plug our hue, saturation, and value into our color, and we're going to plug random into hue. Now, nothing has happened, and that's because our color value is too bright. But if we bring this down and move it around, you see that we're starting to get some colors. I'm going to bring it up actually to that. And I want kind of like a birthday cake color, like this. I think that looks pretty good. But, you know, dial it to taste. Just like, you know, whatever looks good to your eye. But to me, this looks fun. I like the way that looks. So I'm going to keep this. So now that we have those things, the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to add the shading for our actual donut. And we're going to do that by applying the maps that I provided with this tutorial. So let's create a new material. I'm going to name it donut. And if we hit Shift A and hit search, we're going to add an image texture. Now all you have to do is hit the open button. You're going to navigate to where the textures are. We're going to grab the base color texture. I provided various resolutions for these textures. So if like the 4K texture is too much for your computer to handle, you know, you have like 2K and 1K, which will hopefully be a lot friendlier to work with. Okay, so that looks pretty good. You know, pretty flat, kind of weird looking. This is just the start. So we're going to Shift D to duplicate this. We want to, before we change our texture in this drop down here, we want to actually hit this 2 button to make sure that you don't accidentally make any changes to your original texture here. So we're going to plug in our roughness, which should give us the, you know, reflectivity information. And now we're going to hit Shift A and add a normal map. So before we add any normal maps, we always want to actually use this node first. Shift D to duplicate our texture image. Hit the 2, hit open, and we're going to navigate over to our normal map. Plug both colors in. Whoops. Okay, so it's doing something. Not what we want. I don't think I've ever seen a donut look like that before. Anything that's looking like a really stale donut. So once again, we're going to add subsurface scattering to this. So it kind of looks like, you know, it's a porous object. Like light is entering in and scattering throughout the donut, you know, as it were. Or as it would, rather. So once again, we're going to switch over to Christensen Burley. And I'm just going to put the weight all the way up. That's probably too much, but to my eye, that looks pretty good. Yeah, we want to put it all the way up because we're going to displace this donut. And the more displacement data that we have, the more it's going to look like a porous object. And this subsurface scattering is going to help for that a lot. So now that we have all of our textures in place, let's go back to layout. And we are going to add some more modifiers to both the frosting and the donut itself. So first with the donut here, we go to our modifiers. We haven't subdivided it yet. So I'm going to add first a subdivision surface. I'm going to crank this up to like 4. Hopefully this doesn't break anyone's computer. You know what? Actually, I'm going to go even further. Let me go 5. Okay. If you find that like this is just unworkable, don't worry about it. You can do 3 or 4. It should be, you know, should be fine. Should still give you a good result. But now that we have this smoothed out, we're going to add another modifier. I'm going to go to deform. I'm going to add displacement. And just like we did before, we're going to bring the strength all the way down. Click new. And we're going to set our coordinates from local to UV. And we're going to hit our textures tab button here. But instead of adding image or movie, we're going to actually go down to open. And once again, we're going to navigate to where those textures are that I provided for this project. And in the textures folder, we're going to grab the displacement map, donut _ displacement. So nothing's happening yet, but when we go back to modifiers and we bring the strength up to like 0.015. Oh God, that's way too much. Okay, that's a very fuzzy donut. I'll do 0.0015. We'll see, we got some interesting looking deformation happening here. Kind of looks like sugar, and you know, it's like porous. It kind of making me hungry, honestly, if I'm being for real here. Let me just bring it up to 0.0025. See if that's too much. That might be too much, but at the same time, from a distance, kind of gives us a really interesting look. Looks kind of real. So I'm just going to keep it at that, but you know, play with this and dial it into you know, what you think looks good. Okay, so honestly, there's only one thing left and the donut is finished. Now I'm going to actually go into a little bit of making a scene for you guys to render, but I would advocate for you to continue working on this project after this tutorial concludes. But hopefully you've had enough fun doing this so far that you'll want to learn how to like 3D model a cup or a plate or like an environment or, you know, anything like that, you know, because basically that's the goal of this tutorial, is to just like show you how much fun it can be to use Blender, especially for the first time. In my experience, no other software comes close to giving you this much creative fun that Blender gives you right out of the package. Okay, so what I want to do for this frosting here is I want to add just one little bit of, or one little wrinkle of detail here. And I'm going to add another modifier and another displace. Going to turn the strength down, hit new, set coordinates to local, and we're going to go over to our textures here, and I'm going to add another cloud texture. Before we go back to modifiers here, there's this setting here in our clouds texture called depth. We're going to hit that, and that basically will just give a little more like detail to this cloud texture that we're adding here. Let's see. So we're going to set the strength to 0.0015. Okay, so this one we could probably crank up a bit more. Nope, way too much. We'll do 0.005. See what's going on here. So, is this doing anything? Yeah, a little bit. A little bit. That actually looks pretty good to me. I kind of like that. It looks like someone took a knife and smeared this frosting on the donut. Now, we're getting this happening, and I don't like that. I think we should fix this. And we have a very easy way of fixing that, and that's vertex groups. So we're going to actually go to our vertex group here, select sprinkle area, and boom! This part is not affected by the displacement map. So if we look at this, I like the way that looks. I think that's pretty good. Although these sprinkles are drowning now, so I just want to grab our particle system and bring it down here. And you do that by just grabbing these little dots on the right-hand side. And now they should stay on top of any modifiers that we add to the donut here. Awesome. So, I mean, that's really it. This is the whole thing here. The donut is finished. It's ready to be rendered. You know, for a bonus here, let's just set up a super basic scene. In addition to the donut textures, I also provided this marble countertop and like brick wall texture. So let's just like set that up really quick. So to do that, we're going to hit Shift A. Actually, before we do that, notice our sprinkle is just kind of hanging out here, doing nothing. So let's just untick this box in our collections, and now it's gone. Okay, so now let's Shift A, and we're going to add a plane. And our donut's kind of going through it. What I want to do is I want to reposition the donut, but I don't want to reposition both these objects independently. I want to be able to just move the donut and the frosting to follow. So we're just going to parent this frosting to the donut itself. I do that by clicking the frosting, shift clicking the donut. If we hit Control P, we're going to set parent 2. We're going to hit keep transforms. And basically all that means is that it's not going to snap the frosting to, you know, the location of the donut mesh if the location of the donut mesh was different. It's just going to keep it in place. Anyways, now if we move our donut, we'll see that it is, the frosting is moving with it. Also, I'm going to get out a render view really quick, just so things are a little bit faster. And I just want to take a look at the side view here. I want to bring this so the donut is just above the floor here. And, you know, basically, I just hit the G key on the donut to move it. And if you hit Z, it'll lock it in the Z axis. Oops, let me just... Oh, I'm sorry. Also, I switched to front view, and you do that by hitting 1 on the numpad. You can also change your views here with this little gizmo. And there's another way that I can't think of at the moment. But anyways, yeah, I'm just going to position that. And it's going to kind of go through the floor, but who cares? Okay, cool. And then we have that set up. Okay, I'm actually going to go back to rendered view because we do have to see what we're doing here. I'm trying to think of a good position for our donut and wall. So I think in the promotion for this, or the preview rather, I had a framing like this, where the window is over here, the donut is kind of like, you know, this little, I can't think of the name of it, but this kind of camera view here. So let's just lock our camera in place, since I like the way that this looks already. I'm gonna hit Shift A to create a new camera, and then we're gonna hit Control Alt and hit 0, so the camera will lock into place of, or take the position that we're currently in. This looks pretty good, but we're not really getting much of the background in this camera view. So let's readjust the camera by using this nifty little feature. if we hit the N key, we'll get this extra menu on the side here. If we click View, we have this nice tick of Lock Camera to View. Tick that. Whenever we move our camera, now it'll actually move the camera replacing the scene. So I'm just going to select my donut so that the camera will actually orbit around that. I just want to like get enough of the background here. All right, so that looks pretty good to me. I'm going to untick this so we don't accidentally move our camera. And I also want to put this camera in its own collection. So we're just going to select our camera, hit M, move it to collection, and I'm just going to name it Cam. And one other thing that I'd like to do, you know, we can actually scroll in and get a closer look at what we our framing here. I want to add depth of field to this render. And a really easy way to do that is if we have our camera selected and we go to our camera options, all we have to do is tick this box, and now everything's blurry. So we just need to tell the camera where we want to focus, and we can do that easily by actually choosing a focus object. So we can grab this little picker and choose our donut here. This mostly gets me what I want. I'm actually not going to use the focus object because I want to actually have more of the foreground element of the donut in focus rather than the back part of the donut. So I'm going to click X here, and I'm going to bring this down. Actually, before we do that, let's switch back to our solid view, and we can actually toggle it so we can see our depth of field happening in our solid view, which would be much easier to adjust. So if we just click this little drop down here, hit depth of field, now we can see what we're working with here, and that's way easier. So I like this. This is much better to me. I like seeing the outer radius here facing the camera more in focus than the back of the donut here. So if we switch back over to our rendered view, cool, looks great. So now the last part of this bonus section here is we're just going to add a wall, and then we're going to shade both the wall and the countertop. So we're gonna grab our plane here, and you know what? Let's actually name this plane Counter, and we're going to make a collection for this plane. Call that Counter. And now we're going to edit this plane. So we're going to tab into Edit Mode, go to Segment Mode, grab this edge, hit E, and then Z, and then we're going to extrude a wall up. And if we look at that, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. That looks pretty good. Might need to reframe the camera, but for our purposes right now, this is good enough. Now we're going to go back over to our shading tab. I'm also going to save this again, just Control S. And now we just have our counter selected, and I'm going to create a new material, name that Counter, and we're going to bring in an image texture. And you just navigate over to the textures I provided. Let me see, where did I put my textures? Okay, so I'm just going to go to the marble textures here. We're going to plug in our base color. And so far so good. Texture's looking pretty good. We're going to duplicate our texture, hit the 2 button, so we just get, brand new texture node. We're going to navigate over to our marble roughness. Then we're going to add a normal map. Duplicate this image texture, make it unique, and navigate over to our normal, and then plug in the color, and then plug in the normal. Cool. So now we got this really nice looking marble countertop. That's pretty great, but I don't know what is going on with this. Also, I don't really want this wall to be marble. I'd like to make it something different. So let's fix that. Before we add a material to this wall, let's tab into edit mode, and we're gonna go to face selection, grab our wall, and we're gonna just quickly UV this wall so that it's not stretched out like this. So we're gonna right click, go to UV unwrap faces, and since it's just a simple flat plane, we don't have to worry about doing anything crazy here. Should be able to just hit unwrap. And voila. Yep, so it did it. That's really all we need to do. And that's looking pretty good. Okay, so now we want to add a separate material for this wall here. There's a couple different ways to do this. I would rather keep this contained in one object rather than separating this and having this as a wall object. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go down to our slots here. We're going to hit the plus button to make a new material ID. I'm going to hit assign so that it'll actually assign it to the wall. And now that we have slot 2 selected, we're going to hit new material, call it wall. And we're just going to do the same thing, adding an image texture to it. And the image texture I provided should just be like a blue, like brick wall. Just made it in Substance Painter, so super simple. So we got that going. Navigate over to the roughness. And, keep in mind, this tutorial is not supposed to be like a tutorial for replacing the Blender Guru's tutorial or anything like that. This is just something that will work in conjunction with Blender Guru's tutorial. This should be like a nice little like appetizer, and if this serves correctly, you'll be interested enough in Blender to actually make your way through something as long as Blender Guru's donut tutorial. Because his tutorial is so long for a very specific purpose. It's designed to show you many different elements of using Blender rather than doing it the way that we're doing it here. He'll go into sculpting. He actually procedurally generates these kind of like donut materials and like textures and stuff like that. Whereas I just provided the donut texture for you. Not that there's anything wrong with that. To be perfectly honest with you, most of my workflow when working in 3D tends to be utilizing maps that are either provided for me or maps that I've made in a separate program. I tend to stay away from doing Blender specific texturing because I use a lot of different 3D programs. And I feel like this workflow is far more fundamental rather than specialized in Blender. Okay, anyways, just wanted to get that out of the way. But, now that we have all those maps plugged in, this is looking pretty nice. Now it's just up to you to take it to the next level. Add a plate, maybe a steaming coffee. You can have like some out of focus objects in the background to make it look like people walking by. There's so many different things you can do with this project now that we have reached the end. And I would love to see it if you make anything cool with this. Or even if you just made it this far, please share with me. Send us my email. And let me know how you like this tutorial. I have done this donut so many times. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm like leaving out too much information or if I'm putting too much information in. I just want this to be very accessible for those who have either never used a 3D program before or, have used a completely separate 3D program. Hopefully this will, pique your interest enough that now you'll go down a Blender rabbit hole and learn as much as you can and, have fun doing it, because that's really what it's all about. I've been using 3D software for well over a decade now. I got my start in 3ds Max, so I use like Houdini and Maya and things like that for work. Nothing has been as much fun to learn than Blender. And even though it's a little difficult if you already have a base in other 3D programs, I promise you it is worth learning it and learning it the Blender way. So by that I mean like really taken the time to get familiar with the hotkeys and fully utilize them. Blender has a very, I wouldn't say strange way of doing things, but it has a, particular way of doing things that you'll find is actually pretty great. I find myself using other 3D software and thinking, man, why didn't they think of this for, Maya or 3ds Max? This makes so much sense the way Blender does this specific task or thing like that. But anyways, hopefully you had fun. Please share your work. And with that, I will catch you later. Oh, and one more thing before you go. Please subscribe to this channel. That will help me out a lot. I got a lot of really cool stuff coming out. I have a new tutorial coming out soon that is Harry Potter inspired. Won't divulge much more than that. But there'll be more stuff besides just tutorials in this channel. So yeah, stick around and hopefully you'll catch some of that stuff coming up soon. But either way, I will catch you later. Thanks for watching.